Welcome to Hydrogen Rising, a bi-weekly podcast created and hosted by the global law firm K&L Gates that brings you analysis of critical, cutting-edge issues impacting the global hydrogen market. We look forward to your engagement and feedback. And of course, don't hesitate to reach out if you have ideas about new topics you'd like us to cover.
Welcome back, Hydrogen Rising listeners. My name is Sandy Safro, and I am here today with my Hydrogen Rising co-host, David Wagner, who is a partner at the global law firm of K&L Gates. David, it's great to see your face on this Friday morning. It's Friday when we're recording this episode.
Yeah, it feels like we've had 3 weeks compressed into one. There's just a lot going on in the energy transition space these days, and I'm excited about the episode today because we're going to talk a little bit about that.
That's right. Yeah, I'm excited about it too. We've got a special guest here with us today who's going to talk to us about one of the topics that we've raised in a number of prior episodes, and we'll get to hear a little bit more about what some companies are doing to resolve some of the issues in the hydrogen sector as it looks to grow towards scale. So without further ado, our guest today is Ana Angel, who is the head of Hinicio North America. Hinicio, for those who are not familiar, is a strategic consultant and does a lot of work in the energy sector, including on hydrogen fuel cell projects, and operates in a number of different countries. And Ana can give us an even better explanation of what Hinicio does. So, Ana, we are so excited to have you here with us today. And as our first question for you, can you share with our listeners who may not be familiar more about Hinicio, what kinds of projects you all work on, what countries you've done hydrogen work in, and maybe a little bit about your background also?
Sure. So thank you very much, Sandy, and thank you also, David, for having me here. I'm very excited to be with you today. So about who I am. I'm Ana. I'm leading the North American activities for Hinicio, as you well said, Sandy. Since very recently, actually, I've been with Hinicio for 12 years now. And before this, I was managing the Latin American region. So who's Hinicio, right? So we're a boutique consulting firm. We are one of the few specialized consulting companies in the field of hydrogen out there. Hydrogen is all we do, really, and that's how we came up with our name. So the H on Hinicio is for hydrogen, and the rest of the word, Hinicio, is for the Latin word meaning to initiate. And, for most people, hydrogen is quite new, but we've been working on this topic for already a while, for 15 years now. So Hinicio was established in 2006 in Brussels, in Belgium. And today we have operations in Europe, in some other places like in Paris or in Rotterdam. And we are also in the Americas. We have offices here in Washington, D.C., where I am based, but also in Chile and in Colombia. We also have representation offices in China and in Mexico. So what we do is, typical consulting work. So our services include strategy consulting, so investments support. We also do policy and regulatory analysis. And we also do what we call project development assistance, which is everything that has to do with supporting hydrogen projects from their very beginning, from their conceptualization stages, all the way through their techno-economic analysis, accessing public funds when they are available, forming the consortia, assessing compliance of the projects with regulations or with certification systems. So really helping putting those projects together and making them work. So we look at hydrogen from several different angles. So we take into consideration, the technical aspects, but also the economics, the markets, the policy. So we look at it from different perspectives. And we work for governments and also for private companies. So we started a bit early in the days of hydrogen, probably a bit too early maybe. But this has been a very, very exciting journey, I can say. And the last 3 to 4 years have been just incredible, a roller coaster for us. Lots of opportunities, lots of work. So I'm happy to share a little bit of that with you today.
That's awesome. Thank you for that introduction. And the name is just such a cool, I see David shaking his head. Yeah. I mean, we love cool company names.
Yeah. And we talk about origin stories a lot here on our podcast. And that might be one of the best ones. I love that. H is for hydrogen and Inicio is for initiation, the beginning. That's fantastic.
So, Anna, I want to pull the thread a little bit on one of the points that you made about certification systems. It's a topic that we've talked about in prior episodes and obviously related to the multiple production pathways that are possible for hydrogen and the potential that, or very significant likelihood, if not near certainty, that certain production pathways are going to be considered more favorable for carbon management reasons than others. So just want to mention a couple things I think due in part to their hydrogen law. France is already actively engaged on this issue, which is something that we've talked about with Melanie Bruneau, who's a partner at K&L Gates in their Brussels office. And it's possible at this point that each country could develop their own regime around certificates of origin and traceability, which I think is one of the kinds of solutions that might create challenges in the market while solving a problem. So I know Hinicio has been doing work on certificates of origin and has helped create something that I think our listeners would be very interested in. Can you talk about the Certify, which is Certif HY, guarantees of origin, what Hinicio's role has been in developing them, and kind of how that program works?
Sure. So yes, you rightly say we've been the designers and we've been leading the implementation of Certify in Europe. That's been happening since 2014. So for those listeners who have never heard of Certify before, Certify is the world's first hydrogen certification scheme out there. And it is used to track the origin of hydrogen and other environmental attributes. So this is, of course, essential to enable the widespread adoption of clean hydrogen because, well, just as electricity, hydrogen can be produced from several different sources, from renewables as well as from fossil fuels. So certification systems allow to trace back the origin of that molecule, its carbon intensity, depending on the process that was used to produce it. So it is definitely very important to enable the market for hydrogen. So we started Certify 8 years ago at the request of the European Commission, and it's being financed by the Clean Hydrogen Partnership in Europe. So this is a European program. What we did is that we created a standard, which is basically the rules and the procedures to quantify the carbon emissions of the hydrogen production. And we have made a methodology to track also other attributes and monitor them, such as, for example, the origin of the energy, the production equipment that was used, and several other aspects. And so together with that standard, we have defined two labels. So those are two classifications for hydrogen that we have come up with. One is for green hydrogen and the other one is for low carbon hydrogen. So we have come up with our own, definition because, well, as you know, there's no really harmonized or a unique definition for what's low carbon hydrogen. Everyone kind of come up with their own definition. So, well, ours is we said, okay, low carbon hydrogen is going to be that hydrogen that's produced with 60% less emissions than the conventional way of producing hydrogen, so gray hydrogen, right, by steam reforming with natural gas. So all the hydrogen that's produced below that threshold of 60% of those emissions, we're going to call low carbon hydrogen. And then if the source of the energy is renewable, then we're going to call it green hydrogen, right? So the way it works is that producers can get their hydrogen certified, meaning that there will be a certification company that will go to the plant. They will check how a particular batch of hydrogen was produced. They will check their equipment, their processes, and so on. And they will issue a certificate. If we're talking electrolysis, for example, producers can be connected to the power grid and they can present a renewable energy certificate to prove that the energy they are using is renewable. So we will provide the label, right? It will be green hydrogen. So these certificates can be later on traded in the market, so a consumer can buy them to claim that they are consuming green or low carbon hydrogen, just like we do today with renewable energy certificates. These systems, well, they allow for transparency, for consumer confidence, and more importantly, they enable price segmentation, right? Because a certain quantity of hydrogen that that comes from a certificate that's certified will be bought in the market at a certain premium price. So certification systems allow for that price segmentation and that price differentiation. Certified today operates only in Europe and it operates in the voluntary market. That means that, well, no one is obliged to certify their hydrogen, of course, but also that these certificates will not allow for a producer or a consumer to claim for any incentive or any benefit towards the government. So basically, you cannot use those certificates to claim compliance with any regulation. This is just for consumer transparency. And for many companies use it for marketing and corporate responsibility purposes. Compliance will be possible in the future. So today, under Certify, we're working on providing also what we call supply certificates, which is certifications that will validate that the hydrogen is produced under the requirements of European regulations, such as the RED II, the Renewable Energy Directive in Europe. Those are very stringent regulations for the way the hydrogen should be produced. And Certify will soon be issuing those type of certificates also to demonstrate compliance.
Anna, that's really helpful. The compliance point is, I think, one of the most interesting points, particularly as we do develop at scale and governments are moving forward with a clean hydrogen initiative. So you said it's only in Europe right now. I know that you mentioned earlier that Hinicio is doing a good amount of work in Latin America, particularly Chile. I've been impressed at how aggressive Chile is being in terms of its focus on hydrogen and its desire to produce substantial quantities for export into global markets. I think that's really interesting. I'd be curious, we haven't spent much time on Hydrogen Rising talking about Chile yet. I'd be curious kind of what Hinicio is doing in Chile, kind of where you see hydrogen developing there. You know, do you think they'll be as robustly successful as they hope? What are you guys seeing?
Right. So, well, Chile is just on fire right now in terms of hydrogen. So we started our operation in 2020, right when the COVID crisis started. But despite COVID, we've been growing there at a very, very accelerated pace. As you mentioned, well, there are a large number of hydrogen projects under development in Chile today, mostly for the exports market, targeting exports. And Chile is aiming to becoming one of the largest hydrogen exporters in the world because they have the potential to do so. They can produce green hydrogen at some of the world's most competitive costs because they are blessed with a very huge solar radiation in the north in the country, in the Atacama Desert. They also have a huge wind potential in the south, in the Patagonia region. So they will be able to produce green hydrogen at very, very competitive costs. And the policy is there. You know, the government has been pushing really, really hard to place Chile in the international agenda, and they've been doing a great work. So we've been involved mostly in projects targeting exports, so for the production of green ammonia or the production of synthetic fuels, and some other projects as well targeting local consumption. So not all of what they are doing is going to be aiming at the export markets. So they are also planning to have some local demand in several sectors, which is very exciting. What we've been doing there is that we've been mainly focusing on providing development assistance to those projects, right? So helping developers in the conceptualization of their projects all the way through the techno-economic studies, the profitability, their feasibility. So we've been working with developers, with investors, but we also see a lot of interest from international companies to enter the Chilean market. So we've been also supporting companies in their go-to-market, their entry strategies, and assess the opportunities that there are for them. So it's really exciting. And in our analysis, we've concluded that despite Chile being kind of far away from the potential import markets, the costs of the shipment of the hydrogen do not really add much on the cost of hydrogen, on the final cost, because you normally will ship like very, very large volumes of hydrogen. So the cost of transportation is really diluted into large amounts. So that really doesn't add much. And our analysis have concluded that Chile will definitely be able to compete with some of the other potential exporters of hydrogen, like some countries that are positioning in the Middle East, or for example, closer to Europe, or Australia that's closer to the Asian market. So Chile has definitely some very interesting opportunities there to tap.
That transportation point is fascinating. Sandy and I both grew up in the LNG industry, globally, both based here but globally, and that the transportation cost of the commodity, I think, is something that I've been hearing a lot of talk about recently. People aren't quite sure what that looks like, and obviously, if you're transporting green ammonia, for example, I mean the dynamics change depending on the transport. So, really interesting conclusion that you all have reached. Just quick shift here to the U.S. Obviously, you're based here in D.C. with Sandy and I, and there's a lot going on here in the U.S. Obviously, a lot coming out of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I'd be curious, just if you can briefly tell us about some of the projects. Obviously, not revealing confidential information, but some of the things that you're working on here in the U.S.
Right, David. So you just mentioned the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law. And as you know, there in the law, they have a provision for what's going to be clean hydrogen, right? So that's the hydrogen that's going to have less than 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. And based on our experience with Certify and with different certification systems, we are now engaged with the U.S. Department of Energy and Argonne National Labs to come up with a qualification to meet those requirements, right? So what's clean hydrogen, how to measure those emissions, and how to be able to verify compliance that you are below that threshold of the 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. So what we're doing is that we are supporting the writing of a guideline document that is going to be used by the project developers here in the U.S., mainly those targeting the Hydrogen Hubs program, so that they are able to quantify the emissions of their production. And we are also detailing what are going to be the mechanisms to verify compliance and eligibility, right? So that's what we've been doing. So we will finalize this work soon. That's going to be an integral part, a fundamental part of the Hydrogen Hubs program that's going to be launched soon, and everyone's expecting so anxiously. And also, we are also helping some other, working on some other projects here in the US. So, for example, we're working with some developers of ammonia, low carbon ammonia projects on assessing their compliance with different regulations. Again, for exports, for example, how do they make sure they comply with certain criteria, standards for certification and regulations? So we're looking into how their plants are laid out, their configuration, and helping them optimize that configuration so that they are able to meet the standards and the compliance.
So it's great. Thank you.
So, Anna, I think we have time for one more question, and it's a question that we frequently ask our guests, and it's a little bit of a broader question, but just based on Hinicio's work, we would be curious where you see some of the biggest challenges and the biggest opportunities for hydrogen development, either globally or within a specific country.
Right. No, so we see definitely tremendous opportunities in the field of hydrogen globally, whether it is just hydrogen or ammonia, methanol, synthetic fuel production. We have a huge challenge ahead to decarbonize our economy and to reach net zero targets. So hydrogen is definitely going to be one of the key solutions in the spectrum of all decarbonization technologies and strategies that are out there. The most immediate opportunities we see are for the direct replacement of gray hydrogen or brown hydrogen, let's say, and in the hard-to-abate sectors. So, meaning those applications where hydrogen is currently used as an industrial feedstock, for example, refining processes, ammonia, methanol production, those type of projects provide the most promising advantages in the short term because they are, well, on the one hand, they are high demanding applications, so large volumes there. And they also have very well established supply chains already. So that obviously helps the economics of the projects. They limit the offtake risks as well. So the project complexity for those applications is significantly reduced. So we think those are, let's say, the low-hanging fruits. And there are, of course, other applications like heavy-duty transportation and applications in the power sector that are definitely interesting as well for hydrogen, and that have been showing some economic competitiveness as well in our analysis. I think definitely the biggest challenge we are facing right now is cost competitiveness of green and low carbon hydrogen, right? So green hydrogen costs are likely to fall sharply in the coming years with technology learning curves, as well as with the scale up of manufacturing capacity and project development. So, the competitiveness of green hydrogen is different from region to region, of course, because that depends on the cost of the fuels that hydrogen is competing against, so incumbent fuels and traditional fuels. But that we see that regions with low costs of renewables and high fossil fuel prices will achieve cost parity earlier on. And also policy mechanisms like carbon taxation will definitely help get there to that cost parity. We also think it's very important to continue working on certification mechanisms. We need to be able to adopt robust tracking instruments to certify the origin of the hydrogen, because we need that as a means to validate and verify the contribution of green hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen towards decarbonization goals. We need to be able to bring transparency to the markets and enable that price segmentation I was talking about before. So working on those standards and implementing a market for those certificates is very important, and it is not trivial because different entities, different governments are coming up with their own standards, with their own thresholds. So some people are saying, okay, like here in the US, clean hydrogen is going to be 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram for hydrogen. Then the European taxonomy says it's going to be 3. Other standards says it's going to be higher or lower. And when you have different thresholds, that will only create confusion in the market. So ideally, we should be able to work together as an international community and work on getting harmonized standards, maybe equivalences between the different standards that are out there, because talking about a unique sole standard in the world would probably be a utopia, but we can definitely establish commonalities and links and to be able to basically draw equivalences like we do with several other standards out there in the world. And consumers definitely need an answer, no? What's low carbon hydrogen? Because they need to plan their projects. And if you are not sure what the threshold is going to be, you might end up oversizing your project or undersizing your project. So it's definitely important in these early stages of the market development to have some clear guideline on what that is.
Yeah, totally. And we see that with our clients who are trying to transact business, right? And they're thinking about their profile, whether it's an individual project in one country or a global effort to deploy hydrogen. Those differences make it really difficult to plan around pricing and around markets. One of the interesting things to me is just, I don't know, the US could really develop a local market and really not need imports or exports, right? I mean, there's enough supply and demand here that we could develop kind of our own self-contained hydrogen economy, it seems to me. So, but that's your insights on that are fantastic.
There will definitely be some trade-off. Ammonia and other low carbon products, just as we see today. So even if the US will be self-reliant, and I agree with that, there's going to definitely be some trade-off, some other products and derivatives and, synthetic fuels for aviation and so on. So you cannot do things on isolation. The market is going to be interconnected. And so we definitely need to work on those international standards.
There were probably enough topics that we touched on today that we could continue talking for another 20 or 30 minutes. So Anna, hopefully we'll be able to have you back on for a second episode to continue to talk through some of these topics. But thank you so much for joining us for the conversation today. It was really interesting and I think very enlightening.
Thank you very much, Sandy and David, for the invitation. Very happy to be here with you.
And David, always great to see your face. I know our listeners just hear our voices, but we get to see each other's faces, which is wonderful. To our Hydrogen Rising listeners, thank you so much for listening in, and we will be back in just a couple of weeks with another episode.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hydrogen Rising. Be sure to subscribe to receive timely notifications of future episodes and check out our market-leading publication, The Hydrogen Handbook, on our website at www.klgates.com.